Not a good day for Julius Malema, and to be honest, the pendulum was bound to swing the other way at some point. I mean, you can only have so many lawsuits against you before, to be frank, justice is going to catch up. And it did. But before we get on to the main video of today, can I yet again remind you, if you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel. I'm sure you're very bored of me asking. In any case, let's get straight on to the news. So there's 4 news articles I want to cover today. The first one is that a US firm is suing Denel for $125 million over 9 fighter jets that, well, they didn't provide to the US and they were under contract to do so. Now, a private US-based air combat training company, unnamed in the report, is suing Denel, South Africa's state-owned defense company, in a US court in Florida for 125 million rand. So you may look at that and say, well, what the hell are they suing us for? Well, the firm alleges that although it ordered 12 Denel Cheetah fighter jets in 2017, only 3 were delivered, leaving 9 undelivered, which has triggered the lawsuit. Now, this should come as no surprise because that's basically what we do in Africa. We take the monies and we don't deliver the products. Now, it's really interesting to understand what they were doing because they weren't actually manufacturing the planes. They were refurbishing existing planes and selling it almost as old stock. I did read the article and think to myself, I wonder what they'll actually be doing with these jets. Training simulations, exercises, what? Because they hardly match US standards for military equipment. In any case, the case highlights long-standing issues at Denel involving operational failures and delays, and raises concerns about its reliability in fulfilling international defense contracts. Now, for those of you who don't know, Denel is, well, effectively one of those state-owned enterprises that are just bankrupt. And there are numerous scenarios, and has been numerous scenarios over the years, of Denel's members of staff not getting paid. Now, remember that should South Africa ever go to war, Denel is the entity that's responsible for providing the armed forces, well, with their military hardware so that they can defend an invasion. At least that's the idea. If you also want to look at it with some form of historical understanding, Denel actually provided a serious amount of the military hardware for the first 1990 Gulf War. So it used to be a very big deal, but now it's a nobody, because they can't even provide refurb contracts to the US. Well, in any case, beyond monetary damages, the fallout itself could impact South Africa's reputation as a supplier of defense equipment. And should the court rule in favor of the US firm, well, the resulting damages, given the currency exposures, may exacerbate Denel's financial instability and prompt scrutiny of oversight and governance of state-owned enterprises. In other words, effectively, the damages are going to be so damaging to the South African company, given the exchange rates, that it's probably going to sink it. It's probably going to need another one of those legendary bailouts that state-owned enterprises in South Africa gets. So let's move on to the next news story. And this is the news story that in South Africa, we have suffered a 54% fraud crime surge. So this effectively is the number of people committing fraud against accounts has, well, increased by 54%. I myself have recently had individuals attempting fraud on some of my banking accounts. In any case, in the year of March 2025, about 566,000 South Africans reported being victims of consumer fraud, which has represented a 54% increase compared to the previous years. Now, the spike in fraud is occurring alongside diminishing effectiveness of law enforcement, and suggesting that weakening crime control has emboldened scammers and left consumers exposed. This is to a large degree because South Africa's law enforcement is unable to deal with white-collar crime. That's quite complicated crime. It requires very sophisticated methods in order to catch criminals. And our law enforcement services struggle to police normal crime, let alone complex crime. So it should go without any form of surprise that the typical approach tends to be, we've got insurance, so what else do you want us to do? Just figure it out. In any case, earlier surveys from 2022 and 2024 data showed that South Africans have historically been amongst the world's most targeted populations for fraud. They were 65% in 2022, were targeted, and by late 2024, that had increased to 68%, which had been targeted through emails, telephones, and texts. Now, most victims, especially those averaging a loss of $450,000 per incident, often suffer in silence, deterred from coming forward due to shame or fear of judgment. And with that, I would say you really shouldn't feel ashamed, because in South Africa, the real shameful people are the criminals themselves. So let's move on to the main news story of today. And really, this is it's a doozy, and it's really one that needs everyone's attention. And this is the news story that on the 27th of August 2025, the Western Cape Equality Court ruled that Julius Malema had committed hate speech. Yep, he actually finally got ruled that he had done something wrong. And no doubt he'll do what he always does and appeal the decision to some Supreme Court or Constitutional Court and say, not possible. Me, Julius, I'm never at fault. In any case, the Democratic Alliance praised the decision and commended the South African Human Rights Commission for pursuing the case. Now, the DA hailed the ruling as a victory for the rule of law and the Constitution. So you may be looking at that and actually saying, so what exactly had he said that prompted the whole thing in the first place? Well, this actually related to an EFF rally from October 2022, where, according to the video footage, I myself actually did a video on this, Julius Malema said, "You must never be afraid to kill. A revolution requires killing at some point because killing is part of the Revolutionary Act." Now, in response to his comments, two complaints were put forward, one brought by the South African Human Rights Commission and another brought forward by an individual who said that they felt specifically threatened by Julius Malema's statements. Now, that individual specifically actually related to the Brackenfell incident. You will recall that that was the individual who famously did a facepalm to one of the EFF supporters. In any case, on the 27th of October, Judge Mark Scheer of the Western Cape Equality ruled that Malema had demonstrated a clear intention to incite harm and to promote or promulgate hatred. Now, the DA, in their response to the ruling, highlighted an instance where Malema's hate speech was broadcast live during a meeting with the White House involving Donald Trump and Cyril Ramaphosa and the South African delegation, emphasizing how such rhetoric damages South Africa's reputation both locally and internationally. Now, according to the DA, this underscores the fact that political figures are not immune from legal accountability, and the DA signaled intent to explore further consequences against Julius Malema, reinforcing institutional checks on inflammatory speech. But what I would say to this is, the case hasn't finished yet, guys. You've had a case in the Equality Court, big whip, he's going to appeal it. He hasn't said he's going to yet, but I know he's going to, because it's just the way he rolls. Stalingrad strategy is a real thing. Now, the DA's emphasis on institutional strength amid divisive political rhetoric suggests that the country's delicate balancing act between free speech and protecting social cohesion, especially as South Africa continues to confront challenges like inequality and internal unrest, remains a topic of interest to everybody who feels that the state of the nation at the moment is boiling pot that's just waiting to combust. Now, the DA did reaffirm its commitments to constitutional protections that allow for free expression, but they said that they do not extend to speech that incites hatred, violence, or discrimination, all of which Julius Malema frequently engages in. So, let me know what you think of the ruling. Is it a massive win for the rule of law? Is it a massive win for social cohesion? Is it one of the attempts at cooling the boiling pot that is current South Africa? Let me know what you think in the comments section below. For me personally, I know this is going to get appealed, but it may be a sign that the state is no longer scared of Julius and the EFF, and this may be synopsis as to what is now going to come forward in numerous other cases which Julius is currently facing and the consequences he may get thereof. In any case, those are just my views. Let me know what you think in the comments. Until tomorrow, bye.